Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and I'm joined again with David Kirkpatrick. How you doing, David?
I'm good. You?
Doing pretty good. It's a nice summer day that we're recording this on. I'm enjoying the summer vacation. You're working the grindstone.
Yeah, afraid so. But it's not too bad when you can open the windows and hear the crickets. It makes the day a little better, even if you have to go to work.
Right. That's right. But we got a good topic. We are rolling on with our new republic, part of Kentucky history. You know, some of those first early statehood decisions, statehood. What would you say? Like we're getting our legs under us, or the Kentucky is, I guess.
Yeah. Kentucky's developing its own personality. It's not just Western Virginia anymore.
Mhm.
It's its own thing.
Yeah. So things are getting started, but we're going to focus on one of the early people that was very influential in not only Kentucky becoming a state, but even the next, 8, 10, 20 years after that, maybe or so. Very influential Kentuckian. That's James Garrard. All right.
Right.
One of my favorite governors of the
That's,
first few.
yeah, and not well known. We talked about some of those pioneers who were so influential, who were just not heard of. I think he falls in that category for this time period.
Yeah, and we're gonna get to that in a minute as well. I mean, he kind of falls into the early pioneer settlers, but he just doesn't have maybe some of those, um, I don't know, reputation, I guess, as those others. Or was he involved in as many battles and so forth, but all that kind of stuff. But we'll get into it. Anyway, so let's start off with old James Garrard. He was born on January 14th, 1749 in Stafford County, Virginia. So a Virginian, like most of them.
It's not.
Right? He checks off that frontiersman
Yep.
category as well. Interesting enough, it is like this is a governor fact. It's like 6 or 7 governors until one of them is actually born in Kentucky. Just throw that
Oh
out
yeah.
there. Yeah, most of them are born in Virginia, North Carolina, maybe Pennsylvania, and then I'm thinking it's maybe Deshay. They may have been born in Kentucky. I don't know. Anyway,
Right. Of course, Shelby was from Maryland, so yeah, he's the
Maryland.
outlier.
That's right.
But you're right.
Yeah. But we'll start off with his family. His parents were Colonel William and Mary Naughty Garrett. I mean, am I saying that? Is it Naughty? Is that a?
So yeah,
It's an odd last name. You get odd last
right.
names from time to time, but they make sense. Like my
Yeah.
ancestors are, well, my grandma is a Cash, which you think, well, that's weird. Why in the world would somebody have the last name Cash? Dealing with money, but
Right.
it's an English name. And in England, pounds is what they have. They don't have cash; it's pounds. So that
That's
it
right.
doesn't it doesn't correlate. But Naughty seems like an unusual one.
It is, and with pronunciations, not to bring James Garrard into everything, but Garrard, we found in some early writings, is mentioned Harwood
Oh,
or Harwood,
yeah,
and it's Harwood is how it's spelled.
yeah,
How they get Herod from that, I don't know. But yeah, early pronunciations are crazy.
yeah. Anyway, James Garrett, he did have an education, kind of in the common schools, in Stafford County, Virginia, which is probably not the most. When we think of a common school, that kind of makes you think of a public school. I wouldn't say this was exactly the same.
Yeah.
He kind of taught. He was taught at home as well, and he loved reading books. He worked with his father on the farm and those sorts of things. Um, kind of in his youth, which was very typical. Probably the reading of the books is probably the least typical out of all the stuff. But what happens is his mother dies when he's
Mm.
he's young, and then his father is remarried to Elizabeth Moss, and that's as anything that's kind of a big thing for a child to endure. So a kind of a big life changing situation or event in his younger years.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, definitely so. And you think about how many people on the frontier went through that. I guess the quintessential example is Lincoln, that everyone knows about. As a stepmother is very influential because his mom dies at a young age. And also like so many people in this period, you don't get a lot of information on Garrett up until he's married, and we know he marries his childhood sweetheart, Elizabeth Mountjoy, in 1769. They have a very happy marriage. They have 5 sons, 7 daughters, 1 son and 2 daughters. Again, another symptom of the time, do die before reaching the age of 2. But the majority of the children lived, and all of his sons, and in my very, very biased opinion, all of his sons do participate in the War of 1812, which warms the cockles of my heart, and all, and this is pretty remarkable, serve in the General Assembly. So a family that's very dedicated to Kentucky in service for the Commonwealth. Uh, he's got a number of grandsons that end up serving in the Civil War, including Union generals. There's Kenner Garrett, there's Theophilus T. Garrett, and again, a very distinguished family. He has another grandson, James H. Garrett, that was elected to 5 consecutive terms as state treasurer. And you've got to be pretty trusted to fill that role. But he serves from 1857 until his death in 1865. So pretty impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you kind of think, this all dates back to the early, what we're getting to here, James Garrett being the second governor of Kentucky. This is a lineage. Maybe even could throw the dynasty tag on there. I mean, that's pretty impressive
Yeah,
accomplishments by the family uh, afterwards as well. If you didn't know by this point, Garrett County is named after this guy. I guess we should clear that up after all the uh, descendants and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, Garrett County was named after James Garrett. And just to clear as well, we just make sure it is not Garrard, it is Garrett.
yes.
You know,
Or Gerard. I've
Garrard.
heard that too. Yes.
Yeah. Um, so so back the American Revolution breaks out, and back onto I guess Garrett's life and how he ended up in Kentucky. And Garrett, like many of the others, joined the cause. He served in the Virginia militia. He actually became a colonel, and then actually while he was on a schooner on the Potomac River, he was captured by the British. So he has a pretty interesting little a military story. He was asked to give information about the Americans in exchange for his release, but he refused, and then he later escaped. So a heroic event here. I kind of wish we had like a diary or something that kind of like explain this a little more, because
Yeah.
that is a tale we need to find out about,
Yeah.
and just because let us know how he escaped and stuff. A lot of the information we got here, I'll say this as well. Kentucky Encyclopedia obviously use that a lot, and then the Kentucky Governor's Book by Lowell Harrison, or Lowell Harrison. Um,
Lowell. Lowell.
yeah, um, that is primary the sources, I guess, for this. So I don't know, if there is a biography even about James Harrod out there, or James Garrett out there. Um, you got you
I'm
got
not
you got
sure.
Harrod on the mind.
To all you folks in Mercer County, I did that for you. That's it's subliminal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not aware of one, but what a loss. That would be great to have.
hmm Yeah. Anyway, that's just what's just left to history. We'll have to make up our own story, I guess.
That's right. Well, we do know that after his service in the Revolution, that's when he moves his family to Kentucky. And like you said, we debate the pioneer tag. He's not here in the 1770s, but he moves to Kentucky in 1783, and he moves the area that would become Bourbon County, and he ends up claiming 40,000 acres. And he's very active in settling the frontier. And he does about everything, all the quintessential or expected tasks you do on the frontier. He surveys land. He ends up operating a grist mill, which is important for getting the corn and the wheat, ground into meal. He made whiskey, which was very common at the time. He farmed, and he was also a Baptist minister. So again, this is a guy who didn't let the grass grow under him. And speaking of his time as a minister, he ends up helping found several churches in central Kentucky. So he's not just keeping the home fires burning; he is pretty recognized regionally. He ends up serving in the Virginia legislature. He does help get Bourbon County established in 1785. His home is called Mount Lebanon, and it ends up being the county seat of Bourbon County when it was originally formed. So his roles, they continue to garner him influence in the county. He ends up being county surveyor at one point. He's a magistrate. He's colonel again of the militia, mirroring his role in Virginia. So all of these are pretty prestigious positions, and really speaks to how much people trusted him.
Yeah, yeah, a lot. I mean, that's it's crazy to think about how much he was doing. How in the world do you have time to do all this kind of stuff? Um, but also too, the thought comes up, and I know it's kind of different times, but how many Baptist ministers
Or
have
making
made
whiskey.
whiskey?
I've thought about that myself.
I mean, you got Elijah Craig and a whole bunch of these other, but it's, which I don't know, different times, I guess.
Definitely a different time.
Um, but anyway, his responsibilities don't just end in Bourbon County and those areas and those traits and stuff. From 1785 to 1799, he serves as a trustee of the Transylvania Seminary,
Mhm.
which is what becomes Transylvania University and so forth. So kind of a big role in that early establishment of higher education, I guess. I don't know if you call it higher education during that time because it would just, I don't know. Would it really be?
Well, I mean, compared to what else you've got, it's
It is
it's
higher.
as good as yeah.
Yeah, yeah. In 1787, he helps organize the Cooper's Run Baptist Church, which is really close to his home there what's it called again? Lebanon, right? Mount Lebanon.
Mhm. Not living.
Uh, through his many endeavors, though, and his leadership roles, his popularity in the state, just grows and skyrockets. His political career continues to kind of develop as he was part of the 5 statehood conventions in Kentucky. He also helped write the first Kentucky Constitution in 1972, and he was a Jefferson Republican. So, obviously, he's got his hand in many pots. So, and people are trusting him with these positions. So he's really getting up there. Popularity is growing, and so forth. And you know, how, how many Kentucky statehood conventions were there? I know we talked about it before.
They have 9 before they actually get it done, I think, so
Okay, yeah. So still 5 um, out of the 9 is more than 50%.
right?
That's pretty good. I can't remember. Um, well, just you can understand that there's so many there. Like there's one and two a year there sometimes, and it makes sense that
Yeah,
somebody doesn't come to Danville and stay for
right.
a month and then come again a few months later. So anyway,
Yeah, that that's a good point, and, yeah, it is odd, they have to have a convention to decide to have a convention to think about statehood, and then they think about statehood enough to tell Virginia they're thinking about statehood. It's very incremental, before they finally get there, but yeah, you're right, and Garrett seems to kind of fit the mold for most of these guys for this time period. He's a Jeffersonian Republican, as opposed to being a Federalist at that time. Those 2 major political parties, and so he fits the mold with one exception, and that's in 1792. There's not many people in Garrett's position who are opposed to slavery, but Garrett was strongly opposed to it, and he even pardons, when he's governor, a slave that's accused of poisoning food in his home. So that, it makes him unusual. He again was dedicated to keeping the state unified, so he appoints political rivals, which is something you certainly don't see much these days. He appointed his own critics at times to offices, so um, that's a big plus in terms of reaching across the aisle. He ends up favoring a lot of democratic reforms that put power in the hands of the people. Uh, he espoused religious tolerance, as you said earlier. He's a Baptist minister, but he had some Unitarian ideas. So he seemed to be similar in a lot of ways, but some of his personal convictions were very different from other people around him.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's a podcast for another time to talk about Unitarian versus the I guess the dominant thoughts at the time, but
Mm.
definitely a bit of an outlier in some of those different political issues and so forth. So and going with all that, that leads up to his election to governor, and which was very controversial. He was a very popular guy and so forth, but his election, one of the few marks against him was how he got elected. And we've talked about this before when we did our episode on his opponent, Benjamin Logan. My God.
Right. That's right.
Um, but the first Constitution of Kentucky had electors choose the governor, and the electors were voted on by the people, and then the electors voted on the governor. Sounds good enough, but there was nothing really that held electors to vote how the people wanted them to vote or anything to that extent. Um, to an extent, the electoral college now in the U.S. is not done that way. Electors vote for the people who the people voted for them. In a sense, they could go rogue and vote for whoever they wanted, I guess, but that would not go well. But in this
Right.
case, in Kentucky's cases, they legit, whoever was voted elector could vote for whoever they wanted to vote for. Once it came down to it, so the election of 1796 is known as the disputed election of 1796 because it was disputed. The candidates were James Garrard, Benjamin Logan, and if you think about, Benjamin Logan was the frontiersman who settled the second oldest town in Kentucky, which is Stanford. You had Thomas Todd,
That's right.
a Danville lawyer, and then you had a fellow named John Brown, which was a Frankfurt attorney or lawyer. Logan was presumed to be the front runner and the most popular. And if you think about this too, we've mentioned this before about how the frontiersman, is James Garrett a frontiersman? Well, he got here, but he was a little bit late compared to, say, James Garrett, Benjamin Logan, Daniel Boone, and all those guys. But Logan had that popularity of being here during those first 10 extra years of settling the frontier and paving the way for everybody to get here. So he had this big popularity behind him. And basically, Garrett was just known as a political leader of Bourbon County. He held many positions and, of course, was very trusted in many different things. But anyway, they have a vote. And after the first vote, Logan had 21 votes and Garrett had 17. Todd had 14. And good old Brown had 1, but nobody had a majority, and therefore comes the problem. Right? Seems
Right.
cut dry, but there's a problem. It's disputed.
There is. And you would think as long as it took them to come to statehood, they would have thought of all the issues that could arise, but not so. The problems do happen. The Constitution in 1792 did not have a way to fix the issue, so the electors hold another vote. That's all you can do. On the second vote, Garrett gained a lot of the votes that had gone for Todd, and he ends up winning a majority. Benjamin Logan, who we've talked about before, rightfully was somewhat upset, having pretty much won the first ballot. He contests the election, and the Attorney General, John Breckinridge, really didn't feel it was validated. So the Secretary of State, however, goes ahead and certifies the election, and Garrett ends up becoming the second governor of Kentucky after Isaac Shelby. So in November of 1796, the Kentucky Senate takes the matter up, they consider it, and they refuse to reverse the result. And that kind of puts the death nail in Logan's political aspirations as far as governor. And so Garrett steps into the office, and he's got a good foundation laid with Shelby, but he's got a lot of work to do, and he's got to figure out a way to maybe smooth over some of the feathers he ruffled.
Oh, very true, and I mean, it's rightfully contested. And again, though, like there was no way. Like I don't think the Constitution didn't have any address, and maybe I don't know. I need to look up and refresh myself on Kentucky's first Constitution. If a majority was even required,
Right.
does it state that there has to be a majority? We'll have to reconvene on that one. Just interesting enough. But again, too, you say November of 1796 is when the state senate looks at the results, and that's James Garrett's already been governor for a few months, so you can't.
Right.
It's kind of hard to kick him out, but anyway, Garrett tried a lot in his terms of office, or Garrett tried a lot while he was in office to help the Green River farmers who had kind of fallen into a lot of debt, but by the end of his term, really little had been done about the Kentucky land issues, which Kentucky had a lot of squatters in its early years, a lot of land issues. That will be a continuing theme of of this era of Kentucky is trying to solve the land issues. But guess what? They started in I don't know 1776. The land issues, it's just plagued with that.
Oh yeah.
Garrett was able to push an entitlement bill through in 1797, and that prevented squatters from paying taxes on improvements of land that they'd occupied. Again, trying his best, I guess, to help the little man, the farmer out there, get themselves more established. Garrett signed a total of 26 counties into existence, so pretty big
Very
number.
impressive. Yeah.
Which a lot, Kentucky has a lot of counties, and a lot were signed in those first 20, 30 years. He
Mm.
signed court reforms and more. One of those counties he signed in was Garrett County. So in 1797, Garrett County was formed and became the 25th county of Kentucky. Yeah, I gotta wonder though if they felt like that was a big achievement. This county's named after me. I've done it. Or if they were, if they were a bit arrogant, like that's right. This county's named
Yeah.
after me.
Put my name on that in capital letters. That's
Um, he also acquired funding to build a governor's mansion. So pretty neat if you think about it. I don't believe Isaac Shelby had any kind of governor's mansion. The mansion was known as the Palace.
very
Uh,
impressive.
yeah, and it later became the lieutenant governor's home, which I don't know if you've seen. It's not a palace. It was not a palace. But I guess to our standards, it was not a
Yeah.
palace. But yeah, I guess it probably was pretty impressive. But you can just see those political teeth coming out. Oh, the governor's building a palace.
Yeah. He's a monarchist. He wants the king back. The recurrent theme of the years.
Yeah.
I can see that being the case. You're right. And his son William does well also. As a current senator, he ends up introducing a bill for another constitutional convention. So, for those keeping score, Kentucky gets a constitutional convention in 1792. They end up having another one less than a decade later. And Garrett was in favor of the convention. He definitely wants to address all the election issues, and he is still concerned, and rightfully so, about slavery. Garrett held anti-slavery views, as we said earlier, and he voted for Kentucky to be a free state. In case we specify that he talked about it some of the convention, but it's important to know he actually votes to keep Kentucky a free state, or to make Kentucky a free state at the first drafting of the Constitution. But his views ended up blocking him from being part of the convention this time. He's not able to participate. He did not get elected as a delegate, and he was denied the possibility to succeed himself as governor. So there is a political cost for the views he held, but he stuck to them. And this is a major political move in other ways too, because Garrett's popularity, like you said, At the time, he's viewed as a Bourbon County politician. He gets the governorship. His name is known across the Commonwealth. His popularity is growing. So this is definitely a political move, but it really limits what he's able to do.
Mm. Yeah, and it does help to say that he said, "Hey, you know what? We should address these election issues." Because I may be governor, but I did kind of screw that guy over a little bit, and make sure it doesn't happen again to somebody else.
But Kentucky learns from it because Henry Clay does the same thing to Andrew Jackson a couple of decades. That's for later in the Republic. So
That's
as
right.
Kentuckians, we make mistakes, but we learn from them. So
That's right. During Garrett's term, the Federal Alien and Sedition Acts was a big controversy. Garrett was said it was oppressive and unjust. He also
mhm.
felt the act denied freedom of speech. So there's that. In his first term, he did reform the militia in 1798, and that kind of sounds a little post dated, but like Kentucky is still part of the frontier even at this point. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not sure what time. What I think Ohio did not become a state until 18.
1803.
Yeah, yeah. So like you got even Ohio's not even an official state yet. You still have Illinois, Indiana, all that area is still not settled as strongly as Kentucky is, and all those areas border Kentucky. So it's one of those things that the militia is still being active and so forth. Um, that brings us to the 1800 campaign or Garrett's term for a governor, second term for governor. The election of Kentucky governors was changed to a popular vote. So that got changed around in the old Constitution, which is a lot better than it was the first time around. And during this election, Logan throws his hat back into the race again. Todd also joins the race again, so you got basically three out of the previous ones all still in the race. The newcomer is Christopher Greenup. He enters the race, but Garrett was the favorite with his continued growth of popularity. I mean, he already won once, and he really hadn't done nothing but get more popular. So he wins re-election with 8,390 votes. Greenup actually takes second with 6,746 votes, followed by Logan with 3,996, and then Todd with 2,166 votes. Um, so this kind of sets up that um, kind of figuratively, the end of the frontier era, the beginning of more of the statehood things. Because as popular as Logan was, by this time, it's 4 years later. He's beginning to fade away in more people's memories,
Yeah.
just from his deeds. Not that his deeds weren't good and good for the state. More so, just the changing of the times, basically.
Right. Yeah, that's certainly true. And to Garrett's credit, he does accomplish a lot as governor. His best attribute was probably the fact that we talked earlier how not only would he appoint critics or opponents, but he was willing to listen to them. He was willing to hear them out. Harry Truman was the Secretary of State and the chief political advisor, and he's counseled by John Breckinridge. So these are names that if you read any early Kentucky history book, you're going to at least hear once or twice. Breckinridge advised him pertaining to legal issues. Um, he had John Edwards, who was a close friend and a legislative leader that he leaned on as well. So, based on all of this and all this feedback, he ends up making a lot of smart political moves. He appointed Christopher Greenup, who just won the election, and Thomas Todd to the Circuit Court and Court of Appeals. And he is very big on appointing people with to positions that have had experience. When you're a young state like Kentucky, it does help to have someone who's maybe tread the waters before. So, Garrett did a good job of that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of crazy to think, oh, you tried to beat me as governor, so here's a position.
Right.
So what's it uh what's the honey versus vinegar metaphor thingy? What did it?
More flies with honey than vinegar.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. I guess that fits, right?
I think so.
Okay.
We're gonna
um,
go with it.
yeah. Some of his key stances were increasing the militia to help support the border state, as we'd said, He supported the education institution. He sought for prison reform as well, and actually educating inmates. So that's a kind of a unique view for the time. In one incident, Garrett actually refused to appoint a county magistrate to the county court because they did not live in the new county. When the new state constitution was written, more power was given to the local courts. So it seems like somebody that trying to get a political move in there, and kind of Garrett seems to kind of shut it down. Like, this doesn't
Yeah,
make us we don't need this. How's that person gonna really represent these people if you don't live there? Uh,
right. Not feeling the ramifications of your decisions. Yeah, so that
yeah.
definitely a smart move. His second term, he does push for aid for businesses as well. And so not only is he helping the little guy, he reaches out to help businesses. He develops trade with the South because you've got most of the trade is flowing into the Ohio and down the Mississippi, so that certainly made sense. In fall of 1802, the Kentucky legislature passes a bill that enlarges the judiciary and permits untrained citizen judges to preside over courts. And you see this balance here because it's certainly introducing more democratic reforms, which Garrett likes, but he's against this bill because it doesn't require some level of experience when you're dealing with the law. So he also felt the law was too expensive and extensive and unwise in allowing these people who never had the opportunity to study the law to be judges. So he vetoes it. The legislator, passes another bill. Garrett vetoes it as well because it's the same sort of thing. It lets judges and attorneys live outside their districts, like you just talked about earlier. He was not a fan of that. The legislator this time, though, overrides his veto, and there's nothing unusual about that these days. It happens all the time in Kentucky, but this is the first time it's ever happened in Kentucky history. So it was sort of a big deal. It was a taking back of the reins by the legislator. So you do get this sort of battle between Garrett and his ideas versus maybe the rest of the state.
Yeah, and that's kind of a very interesting fact because like that's the first time the Kentucky legislature ever, overrode a veto, which says a lot about Shelby and Garrett as well, how well they kind of work together. It seemed because I mean, if you were thinking, there would be a lot more if they were coming to more disagreements, but obviously they were working together hand in hand quite a bit. If that was, I mean, this is 1802, so the state had been around for, or yeah, no, 1804. So the state had been around for 12 years, and only one time had the legislature overrode a veto. So it's pretty impressive. Um, uh, yeah, his second term also kind of entered the Spanish conflict. We'll get more into that in a separate episode. But Garrett had always wanted to kind of strengthen the trade with the Mississippi region, but the conflict very much hindered the process and so forth. Um, but after Garrett left office, he kind of just retires and he goes to his farm in Bourbon County and um, lives out the rest of his life out of the public light. So, really, I think at the beginning I said that he had a long influence afterwards, but really, 1804 was kind of it. He kind of steps out, and that's it. I mean, you could think he had probably had a good 20 years of influence on the state,
Yeah,
and important influence as well. But that was it. He pretty much retires. He dies on January 19th, 1822. So not only does he retire and enjoy his life, he has pretty good retirement too. There,
that's right.
so uh, that's that's James Garrett.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Conclusion. What do you got, or what do you think overall?
Well, Garrett's an interesting case study because, like we said, he is the quintessential Kentuckian in some ways and not others. And he really represents what it meant to be a Kentuckian in the sense that Kentucky's a border state. So there's these ties to the South in terms of trade and that kind of thing, which Garrett loves. But at the same time, he's opposed to slavery, although he himself ends up owning slaves.
Mhm.
So it's that Kentucky paradox. That's a problem. Garrett condemned slavery from the pulpit and things, but it was certainly something he struggled with.
Yeah.
And we talked about embracing democratic reforms, but also not wanting to have people without experience. So he's a paradox, but he's an interesting one.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's very, yeah. And you talk about it being, Southern versus, well, it's like it's already this. People think about the Civil War, 1860, but like some of these views were 60 years old. That you had the
Right.
Kentucky here in the legislature, or these political people who was like already kind of wanting to, uh, get rid of slavery, and this was 1792. um,
Absolutely.
and again, you have the same paradox as you said. Here Garrett was championing or um, seeking to abolish slaves and also owning slaves. How do you
Mhm.
how do you find that? Overall, though, he is one of the more interesting governors. You're not going to find too many who's going to be as successful as far as passing laws and getting what he wants, I guess. But again, that goes back to them working with the legislature and so forth. I don't know exactly right off um, if it was more Federalist or more Jefferson Republican in the Kentucky legislature. I would say probably more Jefferson Republican. Uh,
Yeah.
am I saying that right? Jefferson
Yep.
Republican,
Jeffersonian Republican. Yep. Absolutely.
Jeffersonian. That's part of, yeah. Because I would say that's how it goes more. Probably lean more towards that. So if you have you know legislature and executive branch on the same page, you're not going to have that much disagreement, I guess. Um,
Right. And then even the Federalist position in Kentucky even dwindles more up to the War of 1812 when the party goes away. But we mentioned, not to go off track, but we mentioned the Alien and Sedition Acts.
mhm,
And Kentucky, which is a very Federalist position, John Adams, institutes those laws with the Federalist legislator or
yeah.
Congress. But Kentucky writes the Kentucky resolutions,
Mhm.
which pretty much says we're going to ignore that. So the state was definitely definitely a very Jeffersonian in that
Yeah,
respect.
yeah. Um, yeah, and then, also he was the, first this is mind-boggling, as well, this statistic. He was the first and last governor to serve consecutive terms until 1999, which is quite amazing, but it's basically because you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
You were not allowed to serve consecutive terms after Garrett had served consecutive terms. Um, and you kind of, we just said that they were both Jeffersonian Republicans, most likely.
Mm.
So you would think they wouldn't put that in the Constitution to hinder, your person to serve 2 times, because that literally it's what happened with Garrett. Um,
Of course, you got Washington setting that example on the federal stage because he
ah,
serves starting in 1788, so right about the
there
time
you go.
Washington's second term is ending, this goes into effect. So
There you go. That might be it. But yeah. But anyway, um, Washington's term ended in 1788.
yeah, it starts in 1788.
Starts in 70. Okay, okay, okay. I was about to say, yeah,
So if
but
you
it
add 8
doesn't
years
end.
onto that,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So
Okay.
Washington has just done the two-term thing. You've got John Adams, and so they're already leery of all this concentrated power. It's like,
Uh,
well, if George Washington only does it twice. I'm sure that played
yeah,
some role in that.
that's what it was. Oh, those sneaky, sneaky politicians. But yeah, I find it interesting that because it does not change, and I guess in hindsight, thinking like, in 40 years, it sounds like a long time, but it's not a lot of time to get things done.
Yeah.
Um, and then, to kind of limit that and not kind of to have it changing every 4 years seems to be uh, a little bit counterproductive,
Yeah.
but
Especially these days when you have factories and things that you may sign a deal or shake hands on a deal and it takes 8 years to build a factory, you need
yeah,
more time.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Anyway, I do like James Garrett. He's one of my personal favorites that I like to kind of read about and learn more about. Again, too, and I don't know if people know this as much, but the first few governors, probably excluding Shelby, there's just not as much about them,
mhm,
out there. As you get into the, you know, the I don't really know where to pinpoint it at, but as you get into the later governors, they start keeping more records and more of that kind of stuff of like everything they're doing. Um,
Yeah.
if you think about Isaac Shelby being the first governor, like they're not so much worried about keeping up with every little thing he's doing because he's literally trying to build a state
Yeah.
and the workings of the government. So that wasn't a priority. And honestly, the next few governors, Garrett, Greenup, Scott, it just wasn't as much of a priority. There's probably a little more about Scott, mainly because he was a bit more active military and stuff.
More of a
Um,
celebrity, yeah.
yeah.
And just as a side note to echo what you said, I worked at the state archives for 11 years, and they hold the governor's papers. So
Mhm.
every time a governor retires or leaves office, all those records come there. And in the modern era, you get dozens of boxes
Yeah.
because it's got to cover 4 or 8 years. Governor Isaac Shelby's first term has one box. It's about that wide and about that 18 inches long. And so
Oh,
everything he did that survives outside of a couple of order books or letter books is contained in that box. So
wow.
yeah, you're right.
Wow. That'd be nice to see them too. Pretty good info. Can you just go up there and get them?
You can. They bring them out. They usually actually wear gloves, and they've got a restricted area where you can see them in. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
you sure can.
Oh, wow. Can you take pictures?
Yep, flash turned off. I think it's still that way. So if
Okay.
I'm wrong,
Oh,
they can correct me.
huh.
But yep,
Might need to go up there and do that one day.
good stuff.
Um, do they got a person who will read it to you since it's written in cursive?
That's the problem because you got the double S. It looks like an F and stuff. So I don't think so. They've got some pretty talented folks up there, but yeah, that's it's a challenge.
Anyway, um, well, I guess that's pretty much it for James Garrett. Again, we'll focus a few more episodes on some other governors during this kind of time period, Scott and Greenup as well, and Shelby ends up being the governor again at the end of this kind of new Republic era there. But we get some other topics coming up as well. Just a lot. There's a lot to dissect into this uh, early statehood time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else?
I think that covers it pretty well.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you, the viewers, the listeners. We want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.